In the shadowed corridors and soundproofed rooms, where the world's most consequential decisions are forged, a man's worth is never measured by the volume of his voice or the frantic nature of his movements. Instead, he is judged by his heavy presence, a silent gravity that commands a room before a single syllable is uttered. What is whispered in the elite academies of intelligence is not merely the mechanics of combat or the ballistics of a sidearm, but the most lethal science of all, the art of planting terror through absolute stillness. In this clandestine world, a golden rule is etched into the mind of every operative from day one. If someone dares to challenge you, do not waste your ammunition on shouting or hollow aggression. Rather, cultivate within them a nameless dread, a fear that lacks a visible source but crawls beneath their skin like a frigid current. Have you ever encountered that provocateur who thrives on instability, acting as though they are untouchable, while you boil with an unspoken rage? Have you felt the sting of a calculated insult, followed by a smirk of unearned confidence, leaving you paralyzed and unsure of how to make them regret their insolence? In this elite training, we bypass superficial advice to reveal the 7 lethal psychological strategies used by the shadows, tactics that will shift the global perception of your character forever, and force any adversary to recalculate their position 1,000 times before they dare meet your gaze. The transformation begins in the crucible of vulnerability, illustrated through the journey of a young man named Fadi. He was the embodiment of the good man, as the world often misdefines it, quiet, patient, and convinced that respect was a dividend paid to those who avoid conflict. Yet his reality was a grim landscape, where a colleague named Samir fed on his politeness, using loud-mouthed arrogance and public mockery to sharpen his own ego, while Fadi retreated, broken and wishing for a way to strike back without lowering himself. The pivot occurred during a cold night spent with his grandfather, a retired general whose life was a mosaic of classified secrets, a man for whom prestige was not a title but a physical atmosphere. The general leaned in, his voice a low, resonant frequency, and said, "My boy, fear is not harvested through noise. True terror is planted in the mind long before it manifests on the face." He then handed Fadi the blueprint of silent power, starting with the most primal weapon, the predatory stare. In intelligence circles, the eye is taught as a transmitter of dominance. A predator in the wild does not attack with chaotic energy. It fixes its gaze until the prey is psychologically paralyzed. To master this, you must cultivate visual stillness, locking your eyes onto the bridge of the adversary's nose for seconds longer than social norms dictate, never blinking, offering a cold gaze that strips away their mask and signals to their limbic system that you are not the victim, you are the observer, and they are the subject under scrutiny. Power then flows from the eyes into the physical frame through calculated stillness, while the amateur vibrates with nervous energy, adjusting his clothes or shifting his weight. The trained operative becomes a monolith of stone. Stillness is far more intimidating than movement, for when an opponent shouts or gesticulates wildly, while you remain perfectly motionless, shoulders back, face an unreadable mask, their brain begins to malfunction, unable to find a predictable reaction to process. They begin to ask themselves, why is he not reacting? What does he know that I don't? This is where the fear begins to seep into the cracks of their confidence, a dread further amplified by psychological pattern interruption. The human brain is a prediction engine, hardwired to expect certain social cues. When you shatter these expectations with a sudden silence in the heat of an argument, or by shifting your tone from calm to a clinical, detached coldness, you trigger a cognitive crash in the adversary. You are effectively acting like an interrogator who ceases all questioning just to let the suspect face the deafening roar of their own panicked thoughts in the vacuum of a quiet room. This leads us to the devastating tool known as the interrogation void, a psychological vacuum that the human mind loathes and will attempt to fill at any cost. When someone hurls a provocation or a loaded question your way, do not rush to defend your honor. Instead, allow a full 5 seconds of absolute crushing silence to pass as you maintain unblinking contact. This artificial pressure forces the other party to keep talking, to over-explain, and eventually to apologize or contradict themselves simply because they cannot endure the weight of the silence you have imposed. To descend deeper into the adversary's psyche, you deploy instilled self-doubt. You do not attack them directly, but rather plant a seed of uncertainty with an enigmatic phrase such as, "You seem remarkably confident for someone who knows how this ends," followed by a return to silence. This single sentence transforms their battle from a fight against you into a war against themselves as they spend their nights analyzing your words and wondering what hidden leverage you possess. A punishment far more grueling than any physical confrontation. At the summit of psychological mastery, you find the toxic mirror, a technique where you reflect the adversary's behavior with a detachment that makes their own aggression look pathetic. If they mock you with a certain inflection, repeat their final words back to them with the same tone, but slow down to a glacial, robotic pace, making them feel as though you have bypassed their conscious mind and seized control of their narrative. Finally, these weapons are shielded by the enigmatic aura. Clarity is a vulnerability, and a person who is easily read is easily dismantled. Be miserly with your personal information. Never justify your absences, and ensure your presence remains a riddle that no one can solve. For humanity only truly fears what it cannot categorize or understand. Fadi returned to his world and began to live by these codes. He no longer shouted, he no longer explained himself, and his silent presence became both the shield that protected him and the blade that cut through the arrogance of others. Now, the mantle is yours. You possess these elite psychological armaments, and the question remains, will you continue as you were, or will you let your silence become the most formidable weapon in your arsenal? Remember, in the hierarchy of power, the lion does not need to roar to declare his arrival. He simply appears, and the entire forest falls into an expectant, terrifying hush.